Welcome back to the Dungeon Master's Block, the place where we focus on the Dungeon Master, the most important person in the game, the only person capable of playing God, killing characters, and lowering the ego of all of the other people at the table. I'm one of your hosts, DM Neal, aka Joke Maniac.
And I'm DM Mitch.
And today, we are going to be talking to a wonderful human named Curt Bolin, who is the Dungeon Master for Dungeons and Dragons and Daughters. You have to say it that way, or it doesn't
Yes,
count.
that was perfect, Neil. You could probably replace one of Curt's daughters, and he wouldn't even notice.
Yes, the beard may give it away, but I am dead set that either of them would happily wear a fake beard. And today, we are going to be talking all about intelligent items. And we have a great conversation about that, this, that, and the other. Smart, kind of smart, who knows? But it's a great conversation with Curt.
And speaking of intelligent items, if you are a gold Patreon Dragon or up, you can head over to our Patreon page and download some homebrew intelligent magical items that I've created for you to use in your homebrew worlds. And speaking of Patreon, if you are a silver Patreon Dragon or up, we are starting a whole new Storytime series. And this week, with the release of this episode, you're not just getting one episode, but you're getting 2 Storytime episodes as a bonus for how awesome you Patreon Dragons are.
Yeah. But before we move on, as always, we have some iTunes reviews. And the first one is from Mystic Womble, which I have more questions that I want to know about that. And they
What is a Womble?
Yeah, what's a Womble? What's
Make
a Womble?
a homebrew Womble creature.
Done. And they entitled it A DM's Happy Place, 5 stars. Getting back into D&D and DMing in particular after 30 years out of the game. Absolutely loving this podcast. Chock full of dungeon mastery goodness. That's
a cereal commercial.
yeah, I don't know.
There.
I don't know why we don't have taglines.
We might need to make a t-shirt now with Stomp having a bowl. Maybe it's like a bowl of like cereal dice and just this chock full of dungeon mastery goodness. Mystic Womble, if you're okay with us making this shirt, you let us know.
Yeah, Stompos, chock full of dungeon mastery goodness.
I love it.
Kid tested, mother approved. With fun
Well,
tips
anyway, keep
and
going,
tricks.
Neil. What was the other things that he said?
With fun tips and tricks at every turn. If I could give 6 stars, I would. Well, thank you, Mystic Womble, for getting back into the game and leaving that awesome review.
And giving us that t-shirt idea.
Yep.
Our next one comes from Pardon Me, I'm Flammable, and it's entitled Boredom Be Gone, 5 stars. I love this podcast. I was trying to find something D&D related to listen to while at work, and I came across this podcast. Because of this, I am now working on creating my own homebrew world to DM over. Thank you so much for the wonderful advice and the brilliant ideas. DM Hopeful. So thank you so much, DM Hopeful. These 2 reviews were fantastic.
Yeah.
I love you guys. I love the listeners. I know Neil does too. So thank you guys for writing in.
If there's anything that we want to do, it is expand the proverbial multiverse that is D&D by helping motivate people to create their own worlds. But, Mitch, what time is it?
It is time now for the meat.
I'm starving. We ain't had nothing but maggoty bread for 3 stinking days.
Why can't we have some meats?
The flake meat's back on the menu, boys.
For the meat today, we have a returning guest. I'm always excited to say this. A partner with us with the Block Party Podcast Network. We have Curt Bolin, DM and creator of Dungeons and Dragons and Daughters, here with us again to talk about something different, to talk about something new. But first of all, Curt, how have you been? How have you been? How have your kids been? How's it been in Dungeons and Dragons and Daughters land?
It's been I'm great. Thanks for asking. It's been busy. We're wrapping up summer. We haven't been doing much because we've been doing family vacations. And we've been on the road and we've been traveling and work stuff and other life things get in the way. And my girls are in so many different extracurricular activities as it is right now. It's hard to keep it all straight. So it's difficult sometimes to cut out or to make time to sit down and play Dungeons and Dragons together. But we do, and hopefully we'll have some more episodes coming out soon, but it does feel like that we took the summer off.
Yeah. Well, I remember in the first episode you came on with us and talking about the podcast, like you made it very clear that it's family and the girls definitely way before the podcast, and it's like, hey, if they end up like being like, no, we're not having fun anymore, then you're like, well, we'll move on. And right now you're focusing on family during the summer and you're enjoying yourselves, and yeah, you don't want it to become a job for them.
Right. Yeah, and that accomplishes two things. Yeah, first of all, yeah, I don't want it to become a job. I don't want it to get to the point where where Dungeons and Dragons feels like work to my kids. For
they show up at the podcast recording table in suits.
Right.
They've gotten together. They unionized.
Yeah,
they've got child labor laws leveraged.
Right, and I'm also thinking about the long game. So the second thing there too is, I don't know if we're going to be doing the podcast forever, but I would like my girls to play Dungeons and Dragons for as long as they can into adulthood, like I have. So that's definitely something. I just don't want to sour them on the game in general as well by making it work.
Yeah, you don't want to take the magic away from that. You want them to love it, and you want the podcast to help them to love it, not to dampen that. So awesome. Well, we're super excited to have you back with us again today. I think Neal has the one question. What kind of question is it, Neal?
It is a surprise question.
Yes.
And it is tailored to you. Not that the person intended it, but Mindweave RPG on our Patreon gave us this question that you are perfect for. You, sir, are a retired adventurer with children. Your eldest wants to take up the life. Do you discourage or encourage them?
You absolutely encourage them if you have more than one child.
I like it. Perfect.
You need a plan B, because the adventuring life is very dangerous.
Yes.
That's awesome. Done. Well, thank you, Mindweave RPG, and as always, have more than one kid in case something happens.
Oh gosh, fantastic. Well, let's transition today into the meat. I'm excited. I know Neal's excited. We were excited when you chose this topic, Curt. We're talking about intelligent magic items today. And so to begin, I think we need to recognize that with the transition into 5th edition, if you go back to like older editions of Dungeons and Dragons, with certain things like magic items and other parts of the game, they would have crazy amounts of crunchy rules on how do you do this, how do you do that. When we transition into 5th edition, definitely with great purpose behind it, the creators of Dungeons and Dragons left a lot of things for the dungeon masters themselves to kind of come up with the lore or the mechanics, the ways. And some things I think they just said, you know what, it's not that important how this is actually done. Magic items, the creation of them, it's not spelled out in the Dungeon Master's Guide. They kind of leave it ambiguous, giving a couple ideas. So I wanted to have this conversation start about how are intelligent magic items created? How are they forged? How are they magically imbued with their power? What are some ways that from just imagination and from things that we've looked up, that ways that these items can come literally to life?
So I think the idea of a magic item, especially an intelligent one, kind of falls on a spectrum, if you will, of purposeful or pure accident. And I don't feel like it falls in the middle of that. There's not just someone cranking out intelligent swords. It's either someone has created them with the intense purpose of having that intelligent magic item, or pure happenstance. Like, I fell into this pit and now my cloak talks to me. Like I don't feel like there's much middle ground. So that's my thought.
So Neal, one middle ground that I can think of that would come in between those is the idea of, what if these intelligent items are actually a race, or nice. What if they actually came from a place where all the mundane items in the world were intelligent items. So they, I guess, were created, but not purposefully, because that's just the way that they are. And they somehow started coming into the world like any other race. It's like, at first you have some that start going out in the world, doing some adventuring and exploring. And then over time and over years, they just end up getting into more and more hands. And after so much time, then people just they like any other magical item that's been out in the world for a while, is like they lose track of where it originally had come from.
This is amazing, and I will say up front, whoever is in charge of this, the Patreon content is definitely a race of magical items. Let's just
All right.
We'll say that now.
I have to say that I had to suppress so much laughter while you were saying that, because I love that idea. I mean, the multiverse being in a fantasy setting, like, and thinking about like the endless possibilities that are out there. But I just had this like brief, if either of you watch the show and the listeners who do, I just had that moment of when Rick and Morty, where they're going to different multiverses and they come upon a place where the couches are the living things, and I believe they're sitting on humans.
Yes, they are.
Yeah.
I was like, yes, that's it. That's perfect. To think of a whole entire plane of existence where that's how it is. That's how the magic sentient items are running the show.
Right. So, but I mean, so as far as like being accidentally made or being intentionally made, the accidentally made, I think for me, the intentionally made is a little more interesting, because why would a wizard or a dragon or some other powerful entity feel the need to imbibe or imbue intelligence into a mundane item? It's like, what for what purpose? Did they do it because they were lonely, because they wanted a companion? Or, I mean, if it's a weapon, that's pretty straightforward on what the intent of that thing was for. But if it was a crown or a necklace or a piece of jewelry that they wanted to put this intelligence into, it's like my brain just starts running. It's like, why would someone do this? Does it just simply come down to because they could? And I imagine that there's lots of wizards and lots of games that is the only reason why they do a lot of things, is because they have the power to do this sort of thing.
Yeah, on the accident side, I imagine you are trying to create an item that it could have some property to it that has some sort of communication. Like I imagine like maybe a crown that gives you the ability to speak all languages. And during the creation of that, we know that magic is chaotic and things can go, I don't want to say wrong, because yes, they can go wrong, but sometimes they can go right and sometimes they can just go weird in different directions than you're expecting. And if you were to create a helmet or a crown that is able to grant that ability, but all of a sudden, like, you put that on, and rather than it being just, oh, you're able to speak now all different languages, having like this translator in your head telling you, oh, they said this, you should probably say this back to them, telepathically, like talking you through it, which would be actually a great role-playing device, because you could have this telepathic crown say to your player, oh, here's the way that you want to say this phrase back to them, and having your player have to like say back the gobbledygook phrase and be like, you didn't pronounce that quite right. They're not going to exactly understand what you're saying there.
It turns into a game of telephone at that point.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's awesome. Or, I mean, or the like C-3PO aspect, or whatever persona you want to put to it. I mean, which is a whole other can of worms to open up with the idea of intelligent items, is what kind of, personality goes into that, how little, how much, and the same with the idea of just intelligence in general. How intelligent did you make the magic item?
Yeah, and where does that intelligence come from? Does it just simply spring into being? Does it get taken from somewhere else? Do you have to trap an intelligence into an item for it to become an intelligent item? And if it just springs into being, what is the maturity level of that intelligence at the time? Is it like a baby when it first gets created? So the only thing it can do is like emotions and scream at you until it learns how to communicate and starts getting things under control.
Yeah, and how do you have to cradle this sword or this intelligence spell book to sleep at night? Like, or it calls down the monsters upon your camp because it's crying and it needs to be rocked to sleep. Like, that's an amazing thing to do.
Okay. Whatever. It is an example. I don't know how to preface any more than that. But it reminds me of a Cheez-Its commercial where they're talking about aged cheddar, and the guy walks in and starts talking to it, and it is just like super immature, making fun of him the whole time, and he's like, not aged enough, and walks back out. So I can see dealing with that same process.
Neal, you could have saved that for the homework section. Just saying.
An intelligent Cheez-It. Here you go.
So then, if you have a character that's responsible for raising this intelligent item, they're shaping the quote unquote person that they become when they get older, right? So could you inadvertently be turning them into a evil item? And then moving forward, that is now an evil magic item.
Raising the item.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Then having to sit down, having moral quandaries, and discussions with them, especially if it's a weapon. I can see that being some very difficult discussions about. It's like, no, there's some people we can stab, and there's some people that we shouldn't stab.
But I'm literally created to stab.
Right.
Yeah, like this is my purpose in
I
life.
have one job.
and we'll talk about this a little bit more in the next section, but what if a sword goes the other way and goes, I don't want to stab anymore, and that we'll talk a little bit more about that. The flip side of what you're bringing up that I think is interesting too is you're talking about like how old is the mindset of this intelligent item, and if it just came into being, are they an infant in that mentality? But then also it's an item. It's not a sentient being with a mortal body. So then you start to go, all right, the sentient lantern has been around for 3,000 years. I imagine, honestly, it would be a little difficult to communicate with, because after 3,000 years, I think of the interactions you can have with between a human and an elf who's lived for so long, and just that age difference. The elves have seen other mortals die off like that, so death is not going to be that big of a deal to it. A year to them is whatever. It's not even a season. So to an item that's lived for thousands of years, if you come in contact with it and it's able to communicate to you, it's going to be some interesting conversation. Yeah,
the intelligence of a creature like that could live for so long could end up being so totally and completely alien. Mm-hmm. So not even communicating with that type of creature, but just understanding what its motivations are or why it does anything or feels about something a certain way. It's we may not be able to fathom it. Yeah, especially with the longevity. It's I kind of think about it, and this is a little callous, but I almost look at it as could they be looking at humans as dogs? It's it's I'm gonna have 6 different dogs during my lifetime. It's just so I can't get too attached to them because
you're a cute pet, but I mean you will die someday, and I will go on.
Right, but my previous one was a lot better than you.
Yeah,
but once you're gone, I'll get another one. We'll try it again.
You don't obey as well as the other one did.
That's awesome.
I also wonder, with this super old magical item thing. This sentient item. What if let's just keep going with that 3,000-year-old lantern. Let's say, what if that lantern is 3,000 years old, but 2,500 years of its quote unquote life, it was just buried in a treasure chest in a dungeon.
Yeah, is it insane now? After being isolated and alone for 2,500 years, is it crazy now?
Yeah.
Because it hasn't
Is it
had
just screaming? Is it just murmuring? Does it need 200 years of therapy to get it back to a way that it can talk to you? Just now I'm thinking of a lantern sitting on a couch. All right, Doc. Let me tell you.
But I mean, I like the idea of then that being, because another thing we've talked about or written down at least to talk about is the idea of what kind of quests, if you will, or missions that would stem from this intelligent item. One of it could be some level of restoration, literal, physical, but the idea that the mind of this item is broken because it has just sat there for 2,500 years. I just can't even fathom that. But maybe it's just a spell, maybe it's a certain XYZ step that you need to take, and then when you do repair it, what does it then have to say of like, I've been here, we have something important to do. I've been sitting here for 2,500 years. We need to fix it immediately. And and the idea of any myriad of things it could bring up that needs to be done right now.
Yeah, well, what if before it was locked in a chest for that many years ago, it witnessed something that the party needs to find out the truth about? Like, what happened those thousands of years ago? Nobody that was around was still alive. But then you uncover, oh, but the adventurer who was there had a sword that was intelligent. And there are legends that the sword is in his tomb somewhere. And you can get to the bottom of the truth behind a situation that nobody was alive for because this intelligent item was there. But then, yeah, does this thing need therapy? Does this thing need some sort of restoration because it's been just seeing darkness for the past 2,000 years?
Right. Or if it was conscious the entire time, then yeah, is it now crazy? It needs therapy, or is it? Could they go to sleep? Like, it could have just wake up one day and like, oh hey, I'm out of that dungeon now and has no idea how much time has gone by. Maybe there's some sort of a trigger that happens to wake it up. Maybe someone's carrying around this lantern for decades and never even knowing that it's an intelligent item because it just, for whatever reason, hasn't woken up or just chose not to reveal itself.
We've gone some interesting places, that's for sure.
One example I can think of, this is during a one-shot game that I was on, but we were talking about some of our other characters, and one of the players at the table had talked about that their favorite character that they had ever played was an intelligent sword that got turned into a human. And so then they had to deal with having a body and arms and legs and being able to move around, and they hated it so much that their active quest was to figure out how to get changed back into a sword because they couldn't stand being this flesh bag anymore.
Yeah. Well, even on the flip side of that, like, there are intelligent magical items that are people that have put their own sentience into an item. And like realizing that these are items that have intelligence, that are sentient, and like to think of quests that you can go on with your PCs, your party. Imagine a item that has the intelligence of a person that maybe has more intelligence because it is far older, and so it's gained so much wisdom and it's seen so much. But imagine being an item that you can't just get up and walk around and do your own things. Like you were never turned into a person to be able to have that sort of freedom. So literally everything you do is done by the person that's wielding you. And if you are like we've said, like a sword or whatever it is, like they're like, cool, this is an adventurer is going to be like, cool, this is a magical sword. This is great. This is a helm that gives me the ability to translate anything. This is awesome. But you're just going wherever the heck they want you to go, doing whatever the heck they want you to do. And these swords, these items, these helms, they have personalities. So what if they just decide, you know what, I don't like this. I don't want to keep on doing exactly what you want me to do all the time. So I'm going to stop making this magic that I control happen until you need to give me some sort of release. Like, you don't understand it, but I used to actually be a really powerful wizard, and I want to see my homeland again. If you bring me home that I can see the tower that I worked in or the city that I grew up in, then I will allow you to access the magic that I hold once again. There's a whole quest right there to bring this item back to the land that it was created. And if it is a person's soul in it, like, that's going to open up more dialogue, more conversation, more role-playing, and getting your PCs to recognize this as more than an item, but this is an NPC now.
I think it's a great way a great idea for any table is you need to give everyone there a level of agency to be able to tell their own story. And the idea of a magic item, especially when we're talking about an intelligent, a sapient, a sentient magic item, like, they also need some level of agency. They are not just a computer program. And now that said, that could also be a way that you approach a magic item or intelligent magic item, is that they are basically a computer program. I put in X and Y and you pump out Z every time, and that's fine. But like, if you want a deep story to revolve around it, you have to give it that level of agency. Because the other thing I was thinking was, going back to what you had said, Curt, was the idea that it was so purposeful of what if someone, and going back to the idea of an elf versus human, what if someone that I did attach myself to is going to pass away because they don't live very long, but I have figured out how to take them, their essence, their who they are, and put them in this magical item that I can then carry with me. And now you have a much richer story.
And I feel like that's towing the line of lichdom a little bit, right? Because it's like taking the soul out of someone's body and putting it into an item. And that's what triggered for me when you said that, because it's essentially extending someone's life. So it could be a way. So so maybe someone intentionally does this because they're so fearful of death. It's the only thing that they could do to extend their life or find some sort of form of immortality.
Yeah, the idea of becoming a lich is, for many good reasons, awfully seen as a terrible thing, and only the evil wizards will do it because of, once again, something that 5th edition doesn't really spell out, here's how you do it. But what we do know is you need to do some pretty dang awful things for it to come about. Putting your soul into a magic item could very well be the good wizard's way of living immortally. Rather than going and doing all these terrible things, I would imagine it's still gonna need a whole lot of magical prowess and power, but maybe not these terrible deeds behind it to accomplish it.
Right, and I think that's where you would get into a sword definitely needing therapy, because how would a person deal with that they were the living, breathing person walking around, and then all of a sudden they're in this inanimate object, and they're so it'd be worse than like what Stephen Hawking had, right? So with how dependent he was on so many people and technologies and to get around and communicate with people, it would be I could see that very easily driving someone insane, and that in itself could be a lot of fun dealing with an item that's intelligent.
Another thing I want to throw out that we have kind of avoided thus far is the joy of introducing a cursed intelligent item and the difficulties that will immediately create for your party. I mean, we kind of hinted at the idea that the sword that doesn't want to cut. What about the sword that wants to cut everybody? And it would definitely be, again, something you would want to engage with your players and make sure whoever you did this to, I mean, that's kind of the way to say it, is okay with possibly giving up some of their agency to the idea of a cursed magical item. And as always, know your players. But it can cause some serious damage in the party because they're at this constant battle with this item.
That's 100% to me when I think of a sentient item. When you say sentient weapon, to me, I feel like there's two branches that item's going to go on. Because if you could just place realizing that these are, what we're really talking about is like NPCs that are items, that their whole entire life, unless they are an item that can move about, is really just up to the wielder. Like, imagine your entire existence being somebody is shoving your sharp face into the body of a person, pulling it out, you're soaked in blood, and that's your entire existence. Just over and over again, just like into somebody's body, pulled out, you see them crumpled on the ground. I imagine there's two routes that an intelligent being is going to go with that. They're going to go with, this is terrible, I hate this, I do want to take that pacifist route, I don't want to do this ever again. And then you have a weapon that wants to be a pacifist and maybe doesn't allow you, because of its personality, to access some really awesome magical abilities that could kick butt in battle. Like, imagine having one of the most powerful swords in the world, but it has the intelligence that's like, I'm not letting you tap into this power. That is an interesting problem to deal with. But then on the other hand, like Neal, you were saying, you could have the other route where this weapon goes and it's just like, I want to drink blood. Yeah. Like having a thirst for it. And it's like, if they're not killing, they're not happy.
And then what if on top of that, there's negative consequences. So not only is like the magic denied to the wielder, but now there starts to be some actual damage that gets caused to the person. Like, so if that blood lust of the weapon isn't satisfied, it actually starts to take the life force or the blood out of the wielder, that type of thing. And then there's all kinds of things that you can play around with it, of making it a cursed weapon, and it gets bonded to the player. And then that's a whole nother quest line. It was like, is if they want to get rid of the weapon. But I think maybe a more interesting choice would be if the player says, you know what, it's worth living with this curse. It's worth killing a random person every couple of days to satisfy this. It's like, I'm willing to live with that.
Nice.
So one thing with intelligent weapons, though, or intelligent items in general, is that, to your point, it is an NPC. I feel like you technically don't even need to give it any other magical properties besides that, and it could still be a really powerful item, especially if the intelligence that is in this item is supremely smart. Just having that as a resource within the party to be able to bounce questions off of, or if it can yell out or give warnings if it notices things like that, or if it's really observant and notices details on monsters or NPCs, and that in itself could be a huge boon to the player and to the group. It doesn't need to do anything beyond that. And then if there's ever kind of conflict, then the item just stops talking to you. It's like, it's not going to talk to you until you do what it wants you to do. So there's a lot of ways that you could play that out, and it doesn't have to be that complicated. It could just be, you're getting the silent treatment until you figure out what it is that you need to do.
With everything that we've talked about, I feel that obviously most DMs are not going to be handing out intelligent items left and right. I think most DMs and most worlds, whether homebrew or actual settings like Forgotten Realms, intelligent items aren't something that it's like you just walk into a shop and it's like, oh, the intelligent items are aisle 6, head down there. Like, they are extremely rare in most cases. And so what I think I would encourage most DMs to do is, if you want to hand out an intelligent item to the group, you know what, if you do it willy-nilly and it just like, you just throw it, you're like, yeah, right now in the moment, I'm going to give them an intelligent item. That'd be cool. Like, sure, go for it. But I think the more thought you can put behind the things that we've talked about, like, what is the age and how does that affect the intelligence of this item, this NPC? What are its desires and its personality traits? I think the more you can think into that and really just settle in that this is not just an item, but this is a new character for you to play with your party, I think the more that this item is going to literally come to life for your players and have a lot of cool role playing and quest opportunities for them who are going to be using it, or difficulties like a crystal ball with a wizard's soul trapped inside that has many answers to life, but is actually just a jerk and doesn't like to answer questions.
One thing I had done in our last campaign at my adult table was that I had one of the players play the intelligent weapon. So the sword belonged to one of the players, and then across the table they had another player that was role playing the intelligence that was inside that weapon. So you have one person, so you have two people that are arguing back and forth on what it is that they need to do with this. And I thought it was really interesting, especially since it did not take very long for the player that had the sword to stop using it because he didn't want to deal with it anymore. It just sat in his bag of holding, never to see the light of day again.
Yep, don't got to worry about air for a magic item. Oh. That's awesome.
Gosh. So let's transition. We've talked a lot about the origins of magic items. We talked about them having like a personality, a will, desires of their own, and how that can be wonderful for the party, how that can give awesome quests, that can create new adventures, and how that can be difficult. But let's talk, and we've done this a little bit as we talked, but let's give out some cool ideas for like actual intelligent items that we can brainstorm, be inspired by, and that any DMs out there listening can hopefully like latch on to some of these ideas and go, I want to use that in my campaign.
The cloak from Doctor Strange, let's be honest. That's like, because that was one of the things from the early conversation that Mitch and I were having. You know, the idea that it doesn't have to be just a weapon, and the idea that that cloak is extremely intelligent and very independent in what it can and can't do. So that I know that's a really good example of adding something into your game, because man, that thing just does whatever it wants whenever it feels like it.
Well, I love the idea of attunement when it comes to magical items, because it's almost like it gets locked onto a particular person. And so if an intelligent item gets locked onto you, it's almost like your magical energies are connected to each other, and they're mixing. And so that you have this odd bond with this item. And it does, for me, I think that's really interesting in that, what if the bond went both ways? So with the bond, you're able to wield the sword, but what if the sword could wield you? And it almost turns into like this contest of wills, of where if you want to try and use it for certain things, it's like, and you get into an argument, one will could win out over the other.
And with Blood Drinker the sword, that could be a problem.
Right. And so then does the player become particularly vulnerable when they're in a state of not having a lot of will? Like when they're asleep, for example, could the intelligent item actually take over that person's life for a period of time to accomplish what it needs to do without the person knowing it?
I think of the creation of a magical item, if it is a magical intelligent item, that if it's somebody putting their sentience, their soul, whatever it is, into an item. And one of the ideas that I was thinking of is, imagine whether it could be a long line of really any type of class, whether it's warlock or wizard or druids or whatnot, that their previous master, at the point of they're going to be leaving this mortal realm, that this is their ritual that they do in order to continue to help their apprentice. They put their essence, their spirit, their soul into the staff that their wizard apprentice will be using. And then if you want to take that a step further, you can go, well, what if this staff contains the souls of every single wizard master from that order? That is going to be first of all, I think that's a challenge for a dungeon master to roleplay, because you could have an intelligent magic item with multiple personalities that don't agree with each other all the time, that may all want to help the PC, but aren't always going to agree with the right thing to do. And now we're talking about a magical item with multiple personality, right?
And you have a random roll each day to determine what personality is it that you're going to have to deal with today.
Yeah, and maybe even that it's that vying for like control of like you have a staff and it's called split, and you have certain personalities that want to be in control at all time, but they have to fight for power to talk to the user, and you don't know who you're going to get.
I do also like the idea of it being an item in general, because that doesn't mean that they're indestructible. I mean, even though they are magical items and they do have the tendency to be much more durable than their mundane counterparts, but they can be destroyed. They can be worn out. They could be chipped or cracked or damaged or ripped. I love the idea of having like an intelligent pair of shoes that won't let you walk for like longer than half a mile, because it's like they're so worried about getting scuffed or getting worn out, because they're fearful of their own mortality. It's like they don't want it, because once they get worn out, that's it, they're done. So they do everything they can to not put themselves in harm's way.
Curt, my question to you is, do the shoes each have a personality?
I think they would have to. Yeah, left and right.
And if they can actually audibly speak, they're constantly talking to each other.
Or what if one was all gung, like your right
let's
shoe?
Keep going.
Let's do it. Let's do it. And your left one's like, no. See, then you're constantly like walking with a limp or dragging your left foot because that boot just doesn't want to come along.
It feels heavier. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just tired. Just fell asleep. I also like that we entitled this section "Thinking Outside of the Box," which immediately made me want to make an intelligent box.
Yep. I was hoping somebody would do that.
Yeah, or the idea of, or
Neil, tell me about this intelligent box.
Any intelligent container is kind of how I also thought of it. Going back to that bag of holding, and I'm not going to hold anything else until you give me X, Y, and Z because that's what I need. And also,
or reaching in trying to get an item and it's not coming out.
Oh, I'd love it.
And that's perfect because the bag of holding has a face on it, so you just can make it start speaking to
or
the players.
The opening of the bag is a mouth, or the opening of the box is a mouth. Yes. And because that's kind of something we didn't really get into, that most of these items will interact in a telepathic way. But that doesn't mean they have to. I mean, it could certainly be a box that opens and closes like a weird puppet thing. And that
now I'm just picturing coming across a treasure chest that is an intelligent magic item, but all the PCs start bringing down their swords and yelling, "Mimic, mimic, kill it, kill it!" And it's, "No, I'm not a mimic."
Please, just
a mimic would say.
Please just get me out of here. No, you just want to go be a mimic somewhere else. No.
Well, speaking of communication, one thing that I've always struggled with is intelligent items that can only communicate through emotions. Because I think in Curse of Strahd, there was at least one intelligent item that was in there that couldn't speak, but it could communicate emotionally to the wielder. And I always felt that kind of that limited things too much, or it got it to the point that the player didn't even care about the novelty of it being an intelligent item anymore, because frankly they just use it as like an early warning system if there was danger that was coming along. Although it's probably a failure on my part as a DM, I'm not coming up with a rich enough history for that item to trigger more emotional things that went along with it. But it would be difficult because, like, if some random thing triggers a whole lot of anger out of this sword or this item, it could be any one of a number of things that the player would have no idea, and they would just gloss over and move on to the next thing. So I'm curious, for you guys, is like, have you dealt with just the emotional communicating item, and how have you dealt with that? Is like, how did you make that interesting?
I think it is probably a lot more difficult. I think if I was going to go that route that they couldn't either telepathically or audibly speak using their intelligence, that I would go with kind of what Neil was saying, like with the Doctor Strange robe, that it can at the very least move on its own. Or I think of the magic carpet from Aladdin, like it doesn't speak, but and I guess that's part of it, is how does it speak to you through emotion? Is it that it sends you the feeling and you all of a sudden start feeling sad? If you have a ring that's just constantly making you sad, you're not going to want to have that ring anymore.
It's a mood ring.
But if it's
literal.
Oh man, I walked right into that one. But if you have a item that shows you its emotion, but cannot speak, because you can certainly with Doctor Strange's robe, you can tell when it's annoyed. You can tell with the magic carpet from Aladdin when it's sad, just by the way that it kind of moves itself.
I think another way I would approach it, because going back to the idea of attunement with a magical item, maybe giving the player like advantage on insight checks, so that when that emotion washes over them, there's a very good chance that they'll understand it. But as with normal human interaction, there is also a very good chance that they will have no idea what is happening. And I think that's a good way to also approach it, because if unless you get to a point where you intuitively know what the magic item feels, and that may be a progression you want, but I think starting out not really knowing and having that back and forth is a more compelling way to go about it. And engaging with that mechanical aspect may draw the player in more than just going, like you said, oh, okay, sword's angry, who cares?
So I guess we'll wrap up. I've got one last idea for a cool item that you can use in your role. But to me, I started to thinking about intelligent magic items. I started to think on like a much grander scale, and most of the discussion we've had has been based off of items that cannot move themselves. But I start to wonder, what if the intelligent magic item is a cart that is able to move itself without horses, or a ship, or an airship? Especially if we're talking kind of like we were just speaking about, like that it can't audibly speak, but it still has this intelligence. I feel like you really need to know, you have to keep this airship happy, right? Or it's just going to start flying you in a completely different direction. So it could be a amazingly magical power airship that is super valued, but you need to treat it right. you need to treat it well. You need to feed it plenty of oil. You need to make sure that the poop deck is just clean and that they're scrubbing it every single day, because if you don't, it's going to be very finicky and it won't get you to where you're going.
And that just feeds right into the superstitions that like sailors and pilots have about their ships, right? It's like you've got to treat her right, otherwise she's not going to save you.
Oh gosh, and now I'm just thinking of pirates or sailors who think their ship is intelligent magic item, but it's not. And you've got the captain like turning the wheel, like, oh, she's going the wrong way. It's like, Captain, we know. Oh my gosh,
Just messing with
this
them.
guy.
I love that. Okay, do we have homework for people to go check out as good examples of intelligent magic items? I'll start. Go watch Troll Hunters on Netflix, because the Amulet of Daylight gives access to all previous Troll Hunters. Kind of going back to what you had mentioned, Mitch. And the interesting thing is that there's a deeper connection to the previous Troll Hunter, but also the availability to go like deeper in also like a meditative state and contact all of them. So that's an interesting way to approach, and maybe not having so many NPCs all the time, just that connection back one step, and then if need be, back to the rest of them.
Curse of Strahd. I know there's a bunch of intelligent weapons that they threw into that adventure. And those are specific items that are typically like geared towards like lawful good characters. And so I'm interested to find out, in other adventures, what other intelligent items or weapons do they have in those, and are they geared specifically towards good versus evil? Are there some that are a little bit more ambiguous to it? Is like, do they flesh out the history at all any more than that? Because in Curse of Strahd it was pretty bare bones, which I think is kind of the case in a lot of the books when it comes to intelligent weapons, leaving it up to the players or to the dungeon master to really put a lot of that history on. But I'm curious if there's other adventures that are out there that there's a lot more information, there's a lot more backstory on those particular items.
I'm hesitant to say mine because I feel like 99% of the listeners are going to go, okay, that's just so on the nose. But I mean, we haven't mentioned the ring from Lord of the Rings. And I think that is a perfect example, like the perfect example of an intelligent magical item that vies for that will, right? And has a personality and desire of its own, wants you to go a different way, and its motives are not aligned with your own, and it doesn't speak audibly. So if there are listeners out there who haven't been exposed to that, great example, check that out. And then the other quick one that I think of is in the Harry Potter books, you have the Monster Book of Monsters, and it totally throws in kind of like Curt, you brought up that like infant like stage of like a magic item. I don't think the Monster Book of Monsters ever gets to the point where it's actually audibly speaking a language. I think it's always just kind of trying to bite you and just like making noises. But that brings about another thing to think about is sentient doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be super smart. What if an intelligent magical item has the intelligence of a beast? It's going to act very different than some intelligent magical item that's been given the soul of a super smart wizard.
I think a really compelling argument could be made that Captain America's shield is a intelligent item with the way that it's able to do things that it shouldn't be able to, or obey the laws of physics, and just doesn't have a very high intelligence to it. It doesn't and is not able to communicate very well with its wielder. But because of the things that he's able to do with it, it's like, I think, yeah, that could be an intelligent weapon.
I like it. Curt, we have an important question for you. Where can people go on the internet to find all the cool stuff you're doing?
They can find us on all kinds of places on the internet. People can go to dungeonsdragonsdaughters.com for our website. You've got links to that from the Block Party Podcast website as well, but we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we're on Twitter. Our handle typically is @DaughterDungeon.
Perfect.
Fantastic. Well, Curt, thanks so much for coming back on the show. And thanks so much for picking this awesome topic, because I know that all three of us had a fantastic time brainstorming and coming up with ideas for intelligent magic items.
This is a fun one. Thanks for having me.
Well, I hope that you have enjoyed this episode, this discussion. I know I did on intelligent magic items. Just such a cool thing to have to play out at your table, having an intelligent magical item join your party as a person. They're people. Come on, guys. Thanks again, Curt, for joining us. Neal, if our listeners would like to get in touch with us and let us know about an intelligent magical item that they either had as a character or as a DM gave to their PCs, tell us all about that magical item, that intelligent magical item. Where can they reach us at?
As always, you can head on over and email us at dungeonmasterblock@gmail.com. And of course, if you like this episode or any of the others and see fit, you can always leave us an iTunes review, which we will read on air.
You can follow us on Twitter at DMS_block. That's at DMsBlock. And you can like our Facebook page. Both of those places are great places to go if you want updates about the show. We have a Patreon member shout out of the week, and this week's Patreon member shout out goes to
Oliver Mag.
Thank you so much.
Yes, Oliver is a silver dragon, tearing it up and voting on the content that we make.
Yes, so thank you so much, Oliver. Enjoy this week. Enjoy those 2 new story times. We hope that you really enjoy those. And just thank you so much from the bottom of our hearts for supporting this show and all the other shows on this network.
As always, the Dungeon Masters Block is a proud member of the Block Party Podcast Network, where you can check out other shows like We're So Bad at Adventuring, Dungeons and Dragons and Daughters, Geek Wars, and more.
Well, thanks again for joining us here on the Dungeon Masters Block, the place where we come to talk about the Dungeon Master, the most important person in the game, the only person capable of playing God,
Killing characters,
and lowering the egos of all other people at the table.
I'm DM Neal. Good night and good luck.
And I'm Dungeon Master Mitch, reminding you to always keep on dungeon mastering.
It's not inspiration, it's not wisdom, and it's bad advice.
At the end of each session, give your players negative critique on what they should have done better. Hello, listeners. Welcome back for another fun episode of the Dungeon
Don't do
Masters
that.
Block.
I can't.
I know. So, like I said, Celeste
It
and
has
I,
this like cadence to it that like
it puts the lotion on the skin, or it gets the hose again. Here on NPR, here on DMB. I don't know how to get motivated after that. I almost put myself to sleep.
this is gonna be a bonus episode of us just talking about it.
It is. I lost my train of thought. I am not an intelligent item. Dungeons and Dragons and Daughters.